Hello there, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Integrity podcast show. I'm Ralph Adamo, your host, and this morning I'm delighted to have another fine gentleman, a good friend of mine, Brendan Farrell. Brendan's the Director of Operations with AO Architects, formerly known as Architects Orange, out of Orange, California. Good morning, Brendan, and welcome.
Good morning, Ralph. Thank you very, very much for having me. This is exciting.
Yes, it's really exciting to have you here. You've got a wonderful story and a wonderful personal and professional journey. I want our audience to know a little bit about you. Would you take a few moments and take as many as you need and let us know about that journey and what's led you up to where you are today and some of the key hallmark mile markers along the way?
Sure. Just real quick, technically, I am the vice president of operations now, which is I came over as the director and have since been moved up to vice president, which is another part of the story that we'll get to later. So for me, I'm an operations executive. That's what I would typically describe myself as. I really enjoy process. I really enjoy continuous improvement, and I really enjoy collaboration, particularly as a means to an end in continuous improvement. So for me, I never thought I would have a desk job and be somebody who worked a 40 to 60 hour work week at a business. My life has become a string of the things that I said I would never do in my 20s, and it's turned out pretty fantastic. But in my 20s, as I was kind of figuring out my view of the world, I was an actor and pursuing a life in the theater. And that didn't go so well. Actually, it went great. I had a lot of fun, but it didn't pay the bills. And when my wife and I, now wife and I, moved out to California, it became really clear to me that if I was going to have the life that I wanted to have and provide the life that I wanted to have for my wife and my family, I need to have a real job, and theater could become kind of the hobby, and I'd have to find a job to support that hobby. So as I was figuring out what it was that I wanted to do, I talked to everybody that I knew, and I had a great mentor at the time, a gentleman by the name of Sandy Kleiman. And he asked me, do you plan to stay in LA? And at that time we did. So he said, don't leave to go to business school. Get a job at one of the talent agencies or find an entrepreneur who likes to teach and become their assistant. So he helped me get a job in a mailroom. And just as I was about to go start working in the mailroom, another gentleman that he knew, an Australian entrepreneur by the name of Shane Yeend, had called him up. He was somebody that Sandy had also helped out, and he was looking for an executive assistant. And it just seemed like the more interesting way for me to go. I started working with Shane, and I ended up working with him for 8 years. I started as his executive assistant, and I left there when we shut the place down as the director of operations. And it was an 8 year crazy roller coaster ride. What I really feel when I look back on that time is I was paid to go to business school, but I was learning on the job. And what I really learned over the course of the time there is how much I love problem solving. And really, when I look back on what I really enjoyed about theater and what I still enjoy about theater, it's about solving problems underneath certain given circumstances, and then having a good time doing it as well if you can. So through working with Shane, it really became apparent to me that businesses are really just stories, and every process within a business is another story. And the training that I got as a storyteller in theater really tuned my eye to how to tell better stories through process and in a way to support the story of the organization. And that's really where it kind of started to sing for me was being able to weave these things together. In an operational way to support a business and to tell the business's story. So I got hooked. And with Shane, it was nothing but chaos and opportunity, one thing after another. We went up, then we had the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. We went down, we had to build the whole thing up again, and then we sold it. And I saw so many aspects of the business. When that ended, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My son had just come along, so I took a couple of months to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And as much as I love problem solving and particularly consumer products, ultimately I felt like I was answering the same questions over and over, which was how many, how far, and how fast. And those were the problems that I just found myself solving again and again. And that got a little boring. So when I started to look at what I was going to do next, what I was really missing from theater in my professional life was the people element and the collaborative aspect. So I started looking around for industries where the stuff that I was interested in, technology, process, those types of things, were key components of the industries, but the human element was much more. And due to a few experiences I had had earlier in my life, architecture stayed in my mind. I had had a wonderful walk with two young architects in Minneapolis years before, and I never forgot the walk. So I started looking at architecture because it was filled with technology. It's a lot of process. It's a creative endeavor. It's a craft, and so I started just applying for professional service firms, particularly in architecture and interior design. Somebody took a chance on me, and it went really well. I was there for a couple of years, and while I was there, one of the people who I worked really closely with left and went to another organization, Architects Orange, now AO, and they invited me to come over and join them about 7 years ago. So I joined them as the director of operations at a time when they were growing really rapidly, and I've been with them for 7 years, and we've kind of built an organizational structure there, and I've made my way up to VP. That's me in a nutshell.
Yes, yes. And you have such a unique way of synthesizing things. Hearing you speak about how far, how fast, and how many, hearing you synthesize it into, well, it's all a story, and clarifying as a storyteller and understanding the storyline and how to depict that and decipher storylines within processes of business. That's a unique perspective and a unique angle that not many people would bring to it. And it's probably your acting background, your theater background that gives light to that, because I don't hear other business entrepreneurs and business folks speak in that vernacular. And it's an interesting perspective. Reminds me of Donald Miller and Storyteller.
Storytelling, I think, and it's not just theater, Ralph. I mean, that goes back to being an altar boy in church, and listening to the priest tell his story and the Bible and that story and all that type of stuff and the other myths and things I was exposed to. The thing about story, I think, particularly when it comes to capitalist endeavors, is you have to keep an engaged workforce from the top all the way down to the bottom. And when you're really grudging it through and you're having to do something that's super repetitive or you don't want to do or anything like that, you have to have the story, and it has to be a good story because the story has to serve as a renewable energy for those moments when the work just seems like it's not going to stop or it's just too hard or something like that. So I think if you ignore story as you're building processes within your organization, you're going to end up with a lot more burnout. You could certainly avoid it by making good stories as you go. Personal belief.
Interesting.
I don't know how you test that, but it's worked out for me.
I mean, it's interesting. You speak about renewable stories, and one of our other guests talked about the sustainability, and ultimately we'll get around to the conversation narrative of integrity and how it plays a role. But he had actually called integrity, the synonym for him was sustainability. Can we
Mm.
sustain our processes in our organization? Because the lack of integrity in his perspective, which I agree with wholeheartedly, could collapse and you won't no longer be sustainable. But that renewable energy, normally I don't jump to this question, but how does integrity play a role from your perspective in employee relations and employee performance, all the things that go into uh, getting a workforce that's mobilized and is excited about doing things? And where does integrity play a role from your perspective?
Um, Gee, what a great question for your podcast, Ralph. Um, so, are you within the context of this podcast defining integrity in a particular way, or because it can mean so many different things to so many different people?
Yeah, yeah. I'm happy to share what I have come to believe and what other guests have shared that have added to my definition of it. Classically, it's honesty, it's transparency. One of the things about integrity to me is that it's seeing things through to completion, making sure that we do what we say we're going to do and we finish what we start. Other folks have added it has to do with consistency, and being
Mm.
able to do it repeatably over and over again. Having that sense and that thread of integrity woven throughout the fabric of the operation, the organization, the individual themselves.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we concluded on that definition. Does that help from a perspective and give you some?
It absolutely does. So thank you. So I agree. And when I think about integrity, it's those components: honesty, transparency, consistency. Accountability is a word I'd add to that, although I think it's already kind of in the mix there. But particularly taking accountability for when when your consistency falters, and that type of thing, and making sure you take ownership for everything. So for me, the role of integrity in keeping an engaged workforce really comes down to, particularly in a professional services firm where it's all human interaction,
Yes.
the quality of the interaction is ultimately going to come down to the quality of the relationship. That's just, in my personal opinion, that's how it goes. And for all the good of that and for all the bad of that, for me, when I think about relationships, there's a model that I think it was my mom actually who introduced me to this. I can't give her credit. I don't. Well, I could give her credit, but I don't know if she actually came up with it. My mom happened to be my science teacher in sixth and seventh grade, so she taught me public health for a little while, and we talked about relationships, of course, and what makes a good relationship, particularly in the context of taking on the responsibility of becoming a parent. Right, that was the education we were getting at the time. And her pyramid, I think it was a pyramid, was, in order to build a relationship, you had to start with choice. One individual has to make a choice to choose another person. Then you have to have mutuality, meaning the object of that individual's choice also has to choose them. Then the next step in that is establishing reciprocity. And reciprocity within the context of that model, I'm actually getting a little emotional about it because it was such a good lesson. And my mom's getting a little older. But within that concept of reciprocity is really balance. And if you're in a reciprocal relationship, there's really no way to establish balance unless you can consistently expect what's going to occur in your counterpart. And to me, if you do not have integrity, or if you're not operating with the best integrity you have available to you at the time, you're never going to be able to establish reciprocity in a relationship, because there's always going to be questions about, is that person going to do that thing that they said they were going to do? Are they really coming to me because they want me to do this, or is this some other motive? There's always going to be a question, or there's always going to be room for a question if you haven't established the integrity. So that to me is what it comes down to. I don't think you can build quality relationships without integrity. You can get productivity out of relationships without it. But I don't think you build at the core a productive relationship which will yield results under any circumstance rather than just in a specific job, without integrity. Does that answer the question?
Not only answered the question, it led to some other insights. I could see how that might stack that as a pyramid when you talked about choice, mutuality, reciprocity, and never forget balance, because an imbalance in a relationship, any kind of relationship, leads to usually resentment. And.
Absolutely. And that pyramid goes past reciprocity, balance, to trust. Trust does not come until after reciprocity, at least in this model. Maybe other people think about it differently, but this is the
Yes.
way I believe. And then you don't actually get delight in a relationship until you have trust. So until you've gone through all of those things, you may have cooperation, you may have, you know, levels of commitment, but you're not going to have the type of relationship that we were referring to as a delightful relationship. And again, this is in the context of parenting. Being a delightful relationship is one that can withstand no matter what comes, right? It is just because life becomes the delight with all its madness, with all its craziness. As long as you've dealt with the choice, mutuality, reciprocity, and trust, you will have a delightful relationship regardless of the circumstance. Again, it's a belief, it's a hope, maybe, but it's how I've been living.
Well, it stacks together well. You have deciphered component parts. I can tell you're a process guy because you have deciphered the process of relationship in a very insightful way. Maybe you didn't originate that, but you articulated it as well as I think anyone could articulate that. And obviously, you've mastered that process and continue to work on it because there's always got the dynamics, the human dynamics of interaction. And you can't control 100% of the human dynamics of interaction for sure, since we only represent 50% at most
Yep.
in any relationship.
And
Yeah.
And honestly, one of the reasons I'm so facile with it is I work at this all the time. I've had a lot of bad relationships because I didn't do these things and I didn't pay attention. So, and every bad relationship I have, or every relationship I need to mend, or every relationship that needs to transform into something else, if you haven't done this work, it becomes much more difficult. So it really my these lessons are reinforced for me on a daily basis. So they're always accessible.
Yes. Well,
I'm sorry, I stepped
you
on
are
toes there.
facile with it for sure. And all of us can learn from it. And our audience is already learning from those insights. Can you give an example where the principle of integrity was applied and benefited the situation in a way that is a hallmark memory for you, whether it's professionally or personally?
I mean, in my personal opinion, any benefit I've seen in any relationship or in any business setting is going to ultimately be tracked back to integrity. So it's usually easier for me to discuss this through the lens of times I've seen acting against an integrity
That was
may
where my
have.
next question was going to go. If we flipped it on its head, and maybe we start there. If we flip it on its head, can you give an example of real life when
It,
integrity was lacking and how you saw the consequences unfold in a not so good way?
Absolutely. And again, it's all going to be perspective, right? So the while I was at the consumer products company, we did a lot of licensing deals, and sometimes we'd work directly with creatives, and sometimes they had big agencies behind them, and sometimes they just had a lawyer, or sometimes they were just crazy and they did it all themselves. And oftentimes, particularly dealing with, we had this one particular deal. One of the things that my company did was trivia games, and crossword puzzles and things like that. And some of the people who are in that world creating those games are really they operate on a different planet sometimes. So gaining their trust in order to get a deal done is really important because they're also being approached by a whole bunch of other people who are saying, "Hey, we're going to make all these promises to you so that you come and play with us."
Yes.
The gentleman that I worked for was a fantastic deal maker, and there were a couple of times where he the integrity of the deal, everybody wasn't being honest, right? While if I were to look at it from individual perspectives, I can easily see from his perspective where he believed he was acting with integrity in terms of his higher goal, which was always turning ideas into profit. And for him, no matter what you needed to do to achieve that, that was integrity to him. But that the way that he did that didn't necessarily feel like integrity to the person on the other end of the deal. So because they weren't on the same page about what integrity meant, basically they weren't in a place where they could understand what the reciprocal relationship would be. They weren't able to get to the trust part, and we didn't get the deal done. Couple of deals we did get done, but then they turned kind of sour, after things didn't go so well. So most of the times I've seen it not really work out is really when it comes down to when you're making a deal, when you're those types of situations where we used to would have said, or our parents would have said, my word is my bond, or maybe our grandparents would have said, our word is our bond. In those situations, if you do not act with integrity at the point of deal making, I can almost guarantee you that deal's going to fall apart in some way, shape, or form at some point down the line because you're missing a really key component.
Yeah, you gave an insight there that I hadn't thought about. That the fellow who may have lacked integrity in the two-way relationship had full integrity to his intention of going idea to profit and
Hmm.
feeling that idea to profit should have been sufficient for the other party to go along.
Correct.
Like,
Correct.
why would you doubt that I have integrity when I know that the outcome is profitable,
Yep.
despite me not having necessary integrity to understanding what's important to you as the counterparty?
That part of the integrity part, I think, comes back to earlier we said that transparency was a part of the definition of integrity, and that's, I think, what it comes down to. I think the honesty. When I think about honesty, transparency, consistency, and accountability within the framework of defining integrity, the honesty part is really, am I really being honest with myself? Are my words aligned with my thoughts and my actions aligned with my thoughts? Do I have intellectual integrity about this? Do I have moral integrity about this? Am I really being who I'm saying I'm being when I make this choice? The transparency then comes in sharing that with other people. And that can actually be one of the hardest steps in business, right? Because oftentimes there are cards that you want to keep close to your vest or something like that. And in my personal experience, whenever I've gone into a deal, I try to lead with, here's the open book. I feel you get to conclusions quicker, and the jockeying is such a caloric burn. The going back and forth, when you could just cut to the chase if you just were transparent about what it was that you were trying to do. If in the instance of the deal that we were talking about earlier, if Shane had just been a little more clear about how he was going to take that idea and what he was going to do with it, then trust may have been established a little bit more. But that part was never clear. So the guy was going to be giving something up a little bit without really having faith, which you can't have without trust, that it was going to be handled the way that he wanted it to handle. That was a bit of a ramble. I'm sorry if I got off topic.
No, no, absolutely not off topic. We talked about workforce. We talked about how integrity tracks in our own lives and examples. I'm wondering what you think about, at the end of the day, business happens because we have clients and customers and followers. What impact do you think integrity has on customer client loyalty?
I think it is, when you're dealing in professional services, it is the thing that brings people back. AO, the company I'm at right now, is a fantastic example of how this works. I mean, we do zero business development. We put together really nice packages for RFPs, but we really don't go out and market our services in a way that somebody who's trying to build business does. But we continue to build year over year because the relationships that our managing partners put in place over the course of their projects, they become trusted advisors. They end up in a quality relationship, and quality relationship begets quality relationship begets referral to hopefully begin another quality relationship. And to me, that's how it goes. And that's certainly how I witness that every day with AO's continued growth and the larger and larger projects we get, because we get calls. We're not calling people, but we get calls along the lines of, hey, I heard about you from this person I know who's worked with you for 20 years or something along those lines. And that all comes down to, as an organization, when it comes to our architectural project, we deliver. We are honest about it. We are transparent about the costs. We are transparent about when things go wrong. We are consistent in that. And absolutely, we take accountability for our mistakes, 100%. And usually our mistakes come because we couldn't be consistent, probably because we were understaffed, because we didn't maybe plan right accordingly, or something surprise came up or something like that. But usually the inconsistency is because we've probably said yes to too many things at once.
Clearly, and in full disclosure to our audience, AO Architects Orange has been a client. Principals of the organization have been clients. The firm's a client of our organization, Integrity Wealth Management. We've been blessed by that relationship. I see the integrity and the honesty in how they deal with our firm, and it's been a delightful relationship to have for sure. It's been a blessed relationship. As we're kind of closing in on our time together, and it's been a delightful conversation. The time has flown by, and I could probably stay on here twice as long. But as the time is getting short for us, I'm wondering. I always not worry. I always want to give something to the young entrepreneurs or the aspiring entrepreneurs, and What would you say to the young entrepreneurs that are listening and the aspiring entrepreneurs that are listening about the role of integrity in their personal and professional lives? And what insights would you give to those younger folks on how to play it and what to play and what to think about as they approach their business endeavors?
I think if you're listening to this and the definition of integrity as a collection of honesty, transparency, consistency, and accountability resonates with you, recognize that each one of those things are skills. Those are muscles. You can train those every single day of your career, whether it's in your relationships with your friends and driving higher honesty there, with your family, whatever it may be. Transparency, you can always drive that more, particularly young. You know, when you're young and dating, there's an awful lot of opportunity to practice integrity in relationships. And if you do that, it's only going to pay dividends in the long run. Ultimately, if you're doing those things, you're going to become more self-aware. And for me, the foundation of integrity is self-awareness and understanding who you really are, what your limitations are. And so get to know yourself. The earlier in your career you get to know yourself, the better off you're going to be. And if you be who you are, people will seek you out for who you are, um, even if it changes over time. If you're consistent about being who you are, even if you move from somebody who's timid to somebody who's loud or whatever it may be, as long as you're being who you are in the moment, people will rely on you and you will build a business, no matter what that business may be.
That's great advice. Great advice, and understanding that it's a muscle and it can be trained. It is a skill and it can be refined. Right? We're given gifts, and we can refine some of those gifts into perfect skills. Well, Brendan, would you, in our closing, would you share with our audience, those that want to get in touch with you, how they might get in touch with you, where they might find you, find your firm, if they've had interest in any of the aspects in the conversation that we had today?
Sure. If you have, first of all, let's start with the business. If you have architectural dollars to spend, or are thinking about spending some architectural dollars, check us out at aoarchitects.com. We're now the largest firm in Orange County. You'll spend a few seconds on our website and you'll understand the type of quality that you would get in working with us. And if you have enjoyed what I've had to say and the way that I approach relationships resonates with you, you're just going to find the same thing at AO when it comes to the architecture stuff. So check us out. In terms of me, LinkedIn is probably the best. Email, unfortunately, I can't even keep up with it anymore, but LinkedIn I'm pretty on top of. So if you would like to find me on LinkedIn, it's Brendan Farrell. I'm the VP of Operations at AO. Message me. I'm always happy to talk to people, and I love going out and having conversations.
Wonderful. Well, this conversation has been absolutely extraordinary. You've done a wonderful job sharing with our audience insights and perspectives and angles that few others have in terms of how to deal with the muscle of integrity and the power of integrity itself. Brendan Farrell, you've done a great job. You're a great friend of mine. I'm delighted to have you. I'm blessed to have you and honored to have you in my life. And I want to say thank you to our audience for listening in. Brendan Farrell, AO Architects. Everybody stay well, stay safe. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ralph. That feeling is very mutual.
Thank you.
The information presented in this program is provided for informational purposes only. The information is believed to be reliable, but no guarantee of accuracy is made or implied. Expressions of opinions are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult a legal or tax professional for specific information regarding your individual situation. This information does not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of capital. Ralph Adamo is registered with the securities and are offered through Kovac Securities, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC, 6451 North Federal Highway, Suite 1201, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33308. Telephone number 954-782-4771. Investment advisory services are offered through Kovac Advisors, Inc. Integrity Wealth Management is not affiliated with Kovac Securities, Inc. or Kovac Advisors, Inc.